got your strip, your 1-inch strip of what you want to show on the front, and a 2-inch strip of what you want to show on the back. You make the length that you need, measure around, and then an extra 6 inches or so. Join your pieces together and press them. Then you can just sew the two together, and it says press it towards the dark, but when I looked at it and the way it goes, I would, instead of just saying press to the dark, which happened here, I would say press it towards the front fabric. And when you fold it, you'll have a little more fullness onto the front so that it would tend to kind of go around the edge, around the corner on this quilt sandwich, where you put your front towards the front, the right sides together, just like you always sew. You leave your little flap like you always do. Then you sew it. You bring it back like this. Then bring this to the back, and there you've got it.
This is your scallop. I sewed in red. And you're going to put that on from the back, your front side. You want the front side to be more smooth. And sew it slowly until you get to a stitch or two of your point. And then you stop. Spread your back side where your clip is open. Don't stretch it, but spread it open. And continue sewing. And then you're going to fold it back from the back, or from the front to the back, and hand stitch it. This will stretch quite a bit. That's what this has done.
This one is flat, this one is round. You'll be doing yourself a big favor if you choose round, and I'll explain in a minute why.
Does it say that in here?
I think it says so, but your instructions that sadly you'll need to purchase do say so. This tool comes with the instructions. Honey, we can't talk that fast. There is a new iteration of this product out, and it's so I can't copy any of her instructions. I've only told you what I have learned from doing it myself. So, shop smart. Use either polyester or cotton. 1 millimeter, I would suggest 2 millimeter drapery cording is what you're using. And this is a round one, and it's polyester. And it tells you to steam it, and I would say do steam it. Don't decide you don't want to steam it because you're feeling a little bit lazy. You'll be sorry. I just ran it from one end of the ironing board to the next and back again until I'd used it all. I pinned it in place, I steamed it, and then I removed the pins. Because think about it, if it's going to shrink, if it's pinned, it can't. So take those pins out. This is drapery cording, it's 1 millimeter and it's round.
1 millimeter polyester?
That's right. Well, polyester or cotton, either one, they both shrink. No. Don't use 2. I would not suggest 2 because it's going to be really bulky at the corners and then you won't be happy with that. So then, the instructions tell you cut on the bias or straighted grain. Cut on the bias. It's way more forgiving and it's actually a little bit fun to play with. So then this is when you're going to be happy you've bought round, not flat. Because when you sandwich that within, it's still going around. You're going to sandwich that within your fabric and you're going to stitch it in place so that the piping, that cording, is right down the side there. And take time to play with your sewing machine to get it so it's close enough. Here's where you're going to be just so happy you got the round, not the flat. Because your instructions, now we're going to have to do some creative thinking here. We're going to pretend this has not been stitched down, or it's trimmed. it fits within that channel, and you're trimming it down, and then, this is so cool, you pull it and it stays within that channel, and you trim a little more. And just tug it, and this was where I was so happy I used the round, and then this one time around I didn't even make that connection until I was trimming, and it was like I was having to reposition it all the time. So take time to buy well. So then, it's been trimmed down, now it's time to attach it to your quilt, and you're working on the right side as though you're attaching binding. Although, you start at the top, you run it all the way down, trim it an inch too long, turn your quilt 90 degrees, attach it at the top, go all the way down, trim it an inch too long.
So you put it on before the binding?
Oh, yes, you do, because now you can see that it's sandwiched within. I then put the binding on as though that piping was not even there. So then,
instead of trying to keep it together,
stitch one at a time, and the instructions say use a contrasting thread so that you've got a guide when the time comes to attach your binding. That's key, because when you're stitching your binding in place, you're working from the back, which is all cattywampus to you. Normally, you start about halfway down, leave a long tail, attach it, and then just stitch in place. You can't do this now because you've got that binding or that piping that you want perfect. So then, rather than working in this direction, you have to flip it because you're working from the back. And the instructions tell you all of this. So, pin in place. Gotta leave a tail. Pin it in place. I pin every inch. I'm a seamstress. I pin. Then you're flipping it over and using that contrast to follow so that you're stitching one thread to the side of that contrasting thread. And then you're ready to hand stitch that thing in place. You'll stitch about 2 inches and then you'll flip.
When you start, leave an end. Back stitch at the beginning of your stitching because this is going to get moved around. Then on every corner, I measure in 1/4 of an inch or whatever width you're going to be sewing your binding. From both ways, and I like a pin on the diagonal, that's just me. Then when you start, pretend this is the beginning. You start at the edge, and once you've gotten in a few stitches, then I start pulling my binding nice and snug against the needle. And I just do finger pinning then. I sew, and then I do a little more, then I sew and do a little more, until this corner comes up onto the bed of my sewing machine. And then I lay it along there. I find the pin with my fingernail, and I pin it with my fingernail, and I sew till I bump the presser foot. And by the time I do that, there's a little mark on the fabric from my fingernail against the pin. I pull out the pin, and I sew up to that mark. Then I lift my needle, my presser foot up, turn my quilt, and I sew off the quilt backwards. So there's a little line of stitching. You take your binding and you flip it backwards. So the edge of your binding is even with the edge of your quilt. Then you finger pin it here and you fold it. So you have a nice little square corner like that. And you start off the edge just like with any piecing seam. You start right at the edge, 1/4 of an inch from this edge. You sew all the way along, finger pinning as you go, till you get to the corner where you've got that pin in there. And do the same thing. And then when you get all done, you flip it over, you have a perfect little mitered corner like that. And the way you know which way to fold it on the back side is this fold on the top. See how the folds on the top? That side goes under first. And then this side goes under second, and then you have a reverse miter on the back, and it's perfect.
This one. Okay, this is the beginning binding. It's not gonna, I'm just going to do a quick one here. The first thing I do, you got to do your homework. And I cut off a little piece off the beginning or the end. It doesn't matter how big this is. What matters is the width of it. That is the width of my binding. And then I set my binding, and you start sewing at least 4 to 5 inches down from the start. So I would start sewing right here. Yeah, okay. So now you're coming around your whole quilt. You've made your corners, and you're coming to the end. You're going to look, and you're going to want to stop 4 to 5 inches above the start piece. Not where you started sewing, but from the top. Okay, so I'm probably judging I'll start sewing. You've cut off that, you've whacked off that little pattern piece. You take your pattern piece and you measure down.
I have learned that the hard way. I've even gotten so I put my
You can also use a ruler, but I measure down and I put a little dot on the outer right edge corner. That's the very first instructional. And then I draw a line up to the top left corner.
How neat!
Okay. This should have been done before I even started sewing. I didn't. Okay, that's there. Fold it up, start your sewing, da-da-da, come around, come into the end, leave 4 to 5 inches. Okay, now I've got all this. What am I going to do? Take your pattern piece and put it on top like this. Or you can use your ruler, but this works good. You just lay this overlap, which is at the end, number 4, on top of that. And you know that this is the length you need for the finished piece. I just sort of finger press it, and you're going to cut this off. Okay, now, because you did your homework, you're going to have an easy time now. You pick up the top layer, which is the finish, and put it in your hand. Oh, that's okay. And you pick up this one, put it in your hand. You're going to put right sides together at a 90-degree angle.
Oh, look at that.
Now you have your line to sew.
Yeah, that was the homework part.
And that is so hard to do without your method.
Well, you know, it just made it easy for me. It's like you learn something from someone and then, yeah, that's okay, but then after you start doing it, you just sort of figure it out the way that'll look better. Then you take, because you've got, that's why you leave this room so you can work. You got a big quilt, and sometimes I sit right at my desk and do this because I've got my big table, and you can maneuver things around a little bit. And now you're going to see what happens all by itself. You sew corner to corner. And like I was saying just before, if you start trying to do this on a little tiny wall hanging project or something, you know, it's hard to leave that space to work. So get a little proficient at it before you try to do it on little things. Just corner to corner. And come over here. And you will see that this will fit right in that space. And now you got to cut this off to 1/4 inch. Trim her down. One thing that I've got going under here is there was a seam joining, but that I usually never let happen. See how I had these two joined? And this should be 1/4 inch, but it's not. But that's okay. So I just open it up usually. It makes it a little smoother. And you fold it right back down.
Do you press that with an iron or just do a pressing
I've
thing?
usually had this pressed already.
No,
You know,
I mean when you press your seam open.
I finger press it.
You finger press it.
And then you go back and you just finish your sewing, and your binding is there.
Jeannie, have you ever put yours together?